it was a swift one in terms of we got them addressing the media quite quickly after the weekend meeting. It was billed as the smackdown of the century, the ANC NEC meeting, but the responses, it seemed a fairly muted affair, quite clear guidelines on if you are accused in public, you must explain to the Integrity Committee. If you are facing criminal charges in a court of law, you must step down. If you are found guilty, you will be out. So that seems quite clear. But there was so much else going on, starting with the fact that the president was speaking directly to journalists. That is significant. Tell us why.
It's hugely significant, Sally. Traditionally, it's the Secretary General of the party that speaks to the statement of the NEC. The president's never even present. The last time, if my memory serves me correct, when something like this happened was when former President Jacob Zuma sacked Julius Malema from the African National Congress and broadcast that decision, and he had all his top 6 officials behind him. So this is hugely significant. It's also significant in the sense that President Jacob Zuma literally this evening got a bloody nose on national television. The president of the country saying that the NEC has endorsed Cyril Ramaphosa's letter. And of course, the former president had said that he is throwing ANC members under the bus. So a dramatic and decisive shift in the balance of forces in favor of Cyril Ramaphosa. If one were to be talking about a boxing ring analogy, one would say an emphatic, knockout in the battle of perception and also just strategic advantage for Cyril Ramaphosa.
But is it just merely round one to Cyril Ramaphosa in a much larger match around who's ultimately going to control? So much talk last week that it's going to come down to Cyril versus Ace. Are those dynamics shifting? Is it over yet?
No, I think it's not over, and it's important to not see this NEC meeting outside of a range of things that are happening at other levels of society. So in as much as this is a political process inside the governing party, the ramifications speak to law enforcement, it speaks to the battle, the legal battle to push back corruption. It also speaks to what is happening at the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. So there's a couple of things that we need to take into consideration when we look at what Cyril Ramaphosa is saying. The first, Sally, is that there is a decided effort to begin to wrap up the cases around corruption. Now, obviously, Estina Dairy has captured the imagination of people. If you look at the genesis of that case, it's in the province of Free State. Who was the premier during that time? Ace Magashule. Now, the public protector lost her ability to ring-fence her findings. So the NPA, if they've got enough evidence, is now cleared after the Constitutional Court ruled to put that matter back on the roll. So we now need to see what evidence the law enforcement agencies have. And if they have the evidence, then it means Mosibenzi Zwane, it means senior members of the then provincial administration of Ace Magashule and the then Premier himself will have very serious questions to answer. I can't imagine a criminal investigation into Estina Dairy that doesn't at the very least require the NPA to have a conversation with Ace Magashule. And the minute that happens, that decision of the Integrity Committee becomes so much more important, because if he's charged, what must he do according to the resolution? Step aside.
If he's charged. And there's the big if. We've seen the first attempt to push for prosecutions with Estina falling disastrously flat.
Yes.
We know that the NPA is struggling. There's just not enough people of integrity there. Shamila Batoy doing her best.
Yes.
But there's lots that has to be done. And, it's a fair argument to say, well, justice delayed is justice denied. These are all in the court of public opinion, but no one's actually dragged me to court yet. So it's a fair point. Do you think that the ANC's decision to say, look, if you're not yet charged, appear before the committee and we will then decide, it's an important distinction in a country with an ailing prosecution system, isn't it?
Absolutely. And also we mustn't forget President Jacob Zuma captured the law enforcement agency, so much so that almost every head of every institution, from crime intelligence headed up by Richard Mdluli, who's facing sentencing now, to Khomotso Pahlani, former head of the SAPS, who has been sacked facing criminal prosecutions, Sean Abrams, dismissed out of the service. All of these institutions essentially made it very difficult to go after state capturers, because they were designed in such a way that they were going to go after people who were opposed to state capture. And that means that the instruments of the criminal justice system was politicized. Cyril Ramaphosa was very careful this evening to say, I cannot be the judge and the jury. We cannot have these institutions be interfered with. And the reason he says that is constitutionally that's important.
Yeah.
Politicians cannot decide who must be prosecuted. We've been there before. But more importantly, Jacob Zuma managed to evade a courtroom for 10 years on the belief that he's the victim of the manipulation of these institutions. He won Polokwane on that conspiracy theory that these institutions were used to come after him politically.
Yeah.
So Cyril Ramaphosa sidestepped that very deftly this evening, putting a big distance between him and an impatient public, Sally, because everybody is saying, when are people going to get into orange overalls? And the president is saying, the day I tell the prosecutors who to arrest, that's the day you must run for the hills. So constitutionally, that's important to say.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we cannot not ask Shamila Batoy to explain to the people of this country who and why they are not making progress in very clear cases of corruption. She needs to take the country into her confidence as soon as possible.
Very quickly, you say that this is a bloody nose for Jacob Zuma and it's definitely a victory for Cyril Ramaphosa. What do you think went on in that meeting for him to gain that ground?
I think what is important is that, the ANC has its own code. So many people, when Jacob Zuma wrote this letter, everyone referred back to 2008, when Thabo Mbeki did the same to Jacob Zuma. There's a small but a significant difference. Thabo Mbeki was at the opposite end of Jacob Zuma politically, but his letter started off with Comrade President. This one, from Jacob Zuma to Cyril Ramaphosa, was Mr. President. In the ANC, those things matter. There was a way in which Jacob Zuma tried to insert himself into this conversation that was not tolerated at this NEC. And Cyril Ramaphosa generally isn't someone who uses words rashly. Remember, at the height of the push to get him out of the state, Cyril Ramaphosa said we mustn't humiliate the former president, etc., etc. When he was asked this evening, Sally, about his response to that letter, he said that, I'm not going to discuss it. It is of no import. He dismissed it. And for Cyril Ramaphosa to be dismissive of a political, colleague in the African National Congress, it takes a lot. And of course, the resounding, endorsement of the NEC, of the president of the ANC now's letter, is the ultimate kind of cherry on the cake. So essentially, this NEC said to Zuma, your term is over. Step aside. Stop trying to influence the developments in the NEC from the shadows or through your proxies. And you heard Esma Khashule constantly trying to explain, we are going to meet with President Zuma. Tony Ngeri didn't say this, in a particular context. So you can see the battle lines are drawn. From the optics, the president usurping Esma Khashule to address this conference, and more importantly, Jacob Zuma's letter being rejected at the NEC because Cyril Ramaphosa's letter was endorsed, in my view, shifts the tectonic plates for Cyril Ramaphosa. Because remember, this man had a very narrow margin, Sally. He has consolidated and he can now move in a very divided organization.
Fascinating undercurrents that you've picked up there. Thank you very much. That is Karima Brown. Of course, she's the host of The Fix, 9 o'clock on Sunday mornings, and a political analyst.